All right. So listen, I'm going to ask those of you that are on the call, if you wouldn't mind, turn your video on, unless you're still lying in bed, in which case don't turn your video on. But it makes for a much better video call. And I'm going to ask for a couple of quick intros. So Calissa, give us your 20-second bio about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry. I've got a toddler in the background. So if you hear him, he's just playing away. And I can't turn my camera on because I am not ready. So
okay,
I may as well be laying in bed.
Fair enough.
But I actually just got my license on Friday, so I'm brand new, but I am super excited to be part of RE/MAX and start my real estate career. I live in Saratoga Springs, and yeah, just excited to learn today.
Are you going to be working on a team? Are you working independent?
Yeah, working on a team. Josh Sterling.
Okay.
Brand new team.
Yeah, I heard about you coming down the pike. So glad to have you on board, and hopefully this can be a productive call for you.
Sweet, thank you.
All right, Dee, it looks like you're working out.
I just got out of the gym. Sorry.
Whatever, you're just fitness shaming us right now.
I should have gone earlier, but I've got kids to drop in the morning. So it's either 5 a.m. or now. So I'm done. Well, yeah, I wanted to join.
I'm just jealous you had the opportunity to get out. So thanks for being on the call.
Yes, yes.
Parker, Carrie, you guys have been on before. Stockton, Robert, Allison Booth. I think is this your first time on the call, Allison?
No, I've been here before.
That's right. You have been here before. That's right. Okay. Well, we're going to get underway today. I hope I have what you guys consider some good content today. I guess you'll be the judge. I'm gonna, like I normally do, I'm going to share my screen here. And we're gonna jump right into this. Let's see here. I have way too many windows open, you guys. Oh, there it was. And if I drag it over to the right screen, that would be helpful. Okay, this was, I'm not scouting out C21. I was trying to remember a stewardship report that we had in the past, and wanted to, I'm going to turn off my camera just because it's horrible. Let's see. Stop my video. You guys can still see my screen though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're not going to jump into this first. We're going to actually start here. Actually, we're going to start here. We always start with the DRE rules, so we cover a couple of them each time. We've actually made it through all of the affirmative obligations of a realtor. We finished that last go round. Now we've jumped into what I call the red section, the thou shalt not section from the Division of Real Estate. And the first one, you can see this box I have over on the right. I said this is known as an umbrella term that the DRE can cover, more than is listed below. So I'm just going to read it out loud and have a quick discussion to move on. So number one, an individual licensee may not. And the first one is engage in any of the practices described in this section and the following sections, whether acting as an agent or on the licensee's own account. So let's just stop there for a second. I've had this so many times where agents have said, well, yeah, but it's my own personal property. You do realize that you're still held to the same standards, even on your own personal transaction, even if you don't run it through a brokerage. You're still a licensee and you're still bound by those rules. So that's what that one means. Then it goes on to say, in a manner that fails to conform with accepted standards of real estate sales, leasing, or management industries, or could jeopardize the public health, safety, or welfare, or violates any of Title 61, Section 2F. So all they're referring there to is the Licensing and Real Estate Licensing Practices Act, which the rules come from. So anyway, that is the rule for this session of contracts and negotiations. Just realize when you see the quarterly newsletter that comes out from the Division of Real Estate, they're almost always referring back to one of these, and be extra careful of the ones that are umbrella terms because they can cram a lot of stuff under that umbrella. All right, so to have a little fun with this, if you already read the quarterly newsletter, let me see here. Here's one that I don't want to see any one of you show up on. And it's this one. Lindsay Erkenbrack, Highland, Utah, in a stipulated order, February 15th, Ms. Erkenbrack admitted that she exceeded the scope of access granted by the listing agent when she and another person entered the home for purposes other than showing the property. You reading between the lines there? Other than showing the property to potential buyers, her conduct failed to show competence. I'm not sure how to take that comment, but failed to show competence as a real estate sales agent, did not conform to the accepted standards of the industry, and was in violation of Utah law and administrative rules. Ms. Erkenbrack agreed to pay a civil penalty of $5,000 and complete 3 hours of continuing education. So, forgot to close my door here. There we go. I actually know some of the particulars on this story, and it's not the first time, nor will it be the last time. Can I just say this? Well, what is it with agents that, is it like some reverse voyeurism thing? Go get a hotel if you're that hot and bothered. Do not use a listed property. It goes very badly, especially when the owner walks in on you. That's what happened. So, thought we would just have a little quarterly newsletter fun today, but you know,
gives a whole new meaning to showing time.
Say that again, Randy.
Gives a whole new meaning to showing time.
Yeah. Well, you know, we can laugh about this, and it's unfortunate, and well, I hope people get their lives figured out or whatever. But that's just a rough thing, especially when it's going to get published amongst all your peers, and you have to live that down. I really do feel poorly, but I also think, what were you thinking? All right. Aside from that, on the quarterly newsletter, there are several things that one of the reasons why I go through it each quarter is to see what the division is paying attention to. Now, I'm not proposing they don't pay attention to everything, but there are clearly some things that they place a focus on. And on this quarterly newsletter, they placed a lot of focus on advertisement, right? And what I mean by that is not having permission to advertise or advertising without attribution to your broker. So just be aware those things are being paid attention to, as well as houses being used for other than listing purposes. All right, that was just the teaser at the front end of this. Let's jump into what I actually wanted to cover today, which is I had a situation that came up from one of our agents on Friday. And I just wanted to share this with you, and please don't, the names don't matter. It's Stuart Dearden. I don't think he'd have a problem with this, but he's representing the seller in this transaction. And on Friday, the buyer's agent and their lender sent over, and this is just before closing, they sent over saying, hey, we need you to get your seller to sign this. So this is an addendum to the purchase contract, and it says $4,300 of the buyer's agent commission to be gifted to the buyers toward down payment and or closing costs. Does anybody see a problem with this? Feel free to chime in.
Wouldn't a closing cost addendum be better?
A closing cost addendum would be better, for sure, Mike.
We don't address commissions on the reps, do we?
Oh, John, way to come through in the clutch. That's right. So what I wanted to point out here is there are really 3 contracts that are involved, okay? The first one is the REPSI. And I know this sounds like our pre-licensing courses, but apparently we need to be reminded of this. That contract is between buyer and seller. We are not signers to the contract, right? Our commissions are not part of that contract. There's a second contract between 2 brokers, right? And that contract comes from our subscription to the MLS. That's where the BAC gets negotiated, and it is contractual, right? It is enforceable. And the third one is the contract between the broker and their client. Okay. Now, it's kind of interesting. Before I go any further, I'm just going to share with you. Stuart sent me a text from the lender saying, don't tell me how to do my job. Just get me the dang addendum signed so we can close on this property. And I don't know, my blood kind of gets boiling because I felt like calling the LO, the loan officer, and saying, would you get your PLM on the line? Give me your, get me essentially your manager, because clearly you don't know what you're doing. So what is the appropriate, if you have this situation show up at the 11th hour and they said, hey, is there anything wrong with gifting the client some of the buyer agent commission?
To whose closing costs? They both have closing costs.
For sure.
It needs to go on escrow instructions.
Oh, who said that? Haley, you're in trouble. You're partially right.
Got a call. Thank you.
You're partially right. I'm going to come back to that. I was trying to set you guys up, and you didn't disappoint me. The problem number one here is the Division of Real Estate says we can never, ever share our commissions with the public, with an unlicensed individual. So when they write the verbiage, whether it's on the right form or not, when they say $4,300 of the buyer's agent commission to be gifted to the buyers, there's a fundamental problem right there, just as a starting point. The correct way to say that within our company is the company will credit the buyer, the company will credit the seller X dollars. I know that seems ticky-tack. Don't throw in the word commission. You're setting yourselves up for potential problems. We will credit them a dollar amount. There is nothing wrong with that. But if you say it's commission, we're potentially in jeopardy. All right. So my take as your principal broker of how this is to be handled. If the agent had called me up, or their loan officer, first of all, I'd say, loan officer, get your PLM on. I'm happy to get on a three-way call because you don't know what you're doing. But if I was talking to the buyer's agent, we still want the deal to close. We don't want to like dig our feet in and be like, you're doing it wrong, right? Because that just creates the potential for things to go sideways, and we don't need to waste the energy. So we put on our velvet glove and we say, hey, appreciate you trying to get this thing across the finish line, but I don't know if you're aware of this, but that agreement for you to credit your buyer actually should be done on an addendum from your buyer or broker, right? Take the blank addendum and say your company at closing will credit the buyer $4,300. That is the way to do it. Nothing to do with escrow instructions in its most pure and simple form. But Haley brought up a point, and I want to touch on that. If, and this is the big if they were going to say reduce the price, so on the one hand, we would take the REPSI and we'd have an addendum saying reduce the price by $4,300, and then we would do escrow instructions, right? To cover the same amount. Does that make sense? I might have munged that for you.
So they did it on an addendum to the wrong contract.
What's that?
They did this on an addendum to the wrong contract.
Correct. If they say, well, listen, we just want to reduce how much we don't need the commission, right? It's a family member, whatever the case may be. We just want you to reduce the price on the house. Well, great. Or the purchase price, I should say. Then that's the point where we would use escrow instructions to say, okay, if we're doing that, then the amount that the seller is going to be obligated to pay us is reduced by an equivalent amount. But I'm going to bring this up on screen so you see exactly why I say escrow instructions aren't the vehicle. All right. So on my screen, I have escrow instructions. Now, in fairness, if you look at the bottom, this was revised a little over a year and a half or 2 years ago, right? 2/23/21. And I'll just say this, previously, they actually had the sellers signing this and they were wrong, right? The verbiage in it said something like, whoever's commissions it's affecting shall sign this. Well, UAR and the Forms Committee went back and said, if they're changing how much is going to be paid, that really should be an adjustment to their ERS, the seller's ERS. This, in its purest form, if you look at it, the title says it all. Real Estate Brokerage Commission Escrow Instructions. And notice it says the following are instructions to the closing office for the payment of the Buyer Brokerage Real Estate Commission, right? The commissions, the BAC. So fundamentally at the front end, this is to modify the BAC. So if it's a credit to a buyer, it's a credit to a seller, that has no place here. This is dealing with the BAC. Okay. If you read section 3, Brandon, read that for me. I talk too much.
Entire agreement. This agreement supersedes and replaces any previous compensation agreements between the seller brokerage and the buyer's brokerage, including, if applicable, compensation offered on multiple listing service.
Yeah, the key point here is between whom? Between the seller's brokerage and the buyer's brokerage, not their clients, not whoever else. It's simply the two brokers, and that's reinforced down below. If you'll notice here in the signature section, there is no signature for a buyer or a seller. Okay. And so in the past, and I will just say this, we as in the industry collectively over the recent historical past have used escrow instructions for everything under the sun. But this is not the case anymore. Escrow instructions are only, as it states here, between broker to broker for the amount of BAC being paid, and only the brokers and their agents sign. No buyer signatures, no seller signatures, no credits for buyers, no credits for sellers. Okay, that makes sense, you guys?
Yeah. So would you just review how you would write that addendum for what they were trying to do?
Oh yeah, 100%, John. So I kind of got halfway down that path. So if I'm talking to the other, John, you're my agent. We do this role play on this call from time to time. Hey, John, appreciate you trying to get this across the line. We have agreed to pay out a 3% BAC, and I've just realized that agents have done this over time, and I'm not trying to talk down to you, but my brokerage will absolutely not sign off on putting this into the REPC, because that contract's between buyer and seller. If you want to give a credit, what you really should be doing, John, is do a simple addendum to your buyer broker agreement that says EXP, that's who you're with, right, John?
Yeah.
EXP will credit the buyer $4,300 at closing. So we're still going to give you the $15,000 that's required by our BAC, and then you guys in turn will turn around and credit your client the $4,300 because that's your agreement. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, this is the way it's to be done. So I wanted to let me pull this back up here.
So Matt, you don't think the loan officer or the underwriter would have a problem with it not being inside the REPC some way? The way we used to do it is we'd say it comes from the seller, and the seller's contributing that amount of money to closing costs, and then with escrow instructions, adjust the BAC. So
Yeah.
it was a tandem event, putting it in the REPC coming from the seller, and then escrow instructions reducing the BAC.
Yeah, the fundamental problem with that, Haley, and this is really a DRE issue, is they don't want us, as John said, they don't want us doing anything with our commissions inside the REPC. Now I'm gonna.
Yeah, but if it's coming from the seller inside the REPC, it's not coming from us. So it's this, but to reduce a purchase price does nothing for cash flow.
Right, but so let's go down this, because I think you're on a key point and I probably didn't make it clear. If they're talking about crediting a buyer, right, who are they crediting it from? I mean, fundamentally, who are they crediting it from?
From the buyer's agent.
From the buyer's agent. And that's our fundamental first problem, according to the DRE. The buyer's agent and the buyer's brokerage, or the seller's agent and the seller's brokerage, are not signers to the contract. Our commissions are not part of that agreement.
What if you were to change the BAC from the listing agreement standpoint and then add those closing costs in on an addendum, so it's still in the REPC?
Oh, sure. So for instance, I think what you're saying, John, is let's say we had commissions at 2% and 2%, right? 4% total. And they wanted some credit back. Could we raise the commissions if the seller agreed? Could we raise on this particular deal? Could we raise the BAC in the ERS to 6% and offer out 4% to the buyer's agent and allow them to do the credit? Is that what you were proposing?
No, I was saying like if it's 3% and the agent wants to credit them $4,300, you take 3% minus $4,300 and you amend that on the listing agreement and make that the new BAC, and then the seller will just agree to pay us $4,300 in concessions. That's the way it stays in the REPC.
I think I'm tracking you, and here's my question: what is to be gained by that? So I think Haley's question is the overarching one. The LO is going to want to see some documentation. My experience is with lenders is they need that documentation, and if you provide them an addendum to the ERS that says, you know, the seller is going to credit, sorry.
The buyer's agreement.
Thank you. The buyer's agreement that the buyer's brokerage is going to credit them some funds at closing. That's the documentation that the lender needs, whether it's in the REPC or coming from an addendum to the appropriate EBB. My experience is the lenders haven't cared.
Okay.
Right? Some of them have bad habits. They've been trained, they've been conditioned to say, oh, I need to see this in escrow instructions because of bad habits of the past. But as far as their underwriter is concerned, they have to source where the money's coming from, right? If they have a document that says, oh, the buyer's brokerage is going to credit them $4,300 at closing, they know where it's coming from.
Okay.
Don, did you have a question? Oops. Okay. Stop my video again. Okay, so the escrow instructions, I wanted to be clear on this. If you're talking to an agent on the other side, I think knowing just a couple things to talk to him and be like, hey, you know, this got updated 2 years ago. Maybe your brokerage isn't aware. Again, I'm not talking down to you, but do you realize there are no room for signatures of buyers or sellers here? This really is just between the two brokerages. So if there's something else you're talking about, an agreement between your brokerage and your client, then this is not the vehicle. This is not the vehicle to use. Okay. Now, there was some, I think, Mike, I think you brought this up. There is an addendum. In fact, I'm going to pull it up on my screen here real quick. Forms, legacy forms. And if you just start typing brokerage, real estate brokerage payment. This is where we get to a little bit of a splitting of the hairs. Move this off my screen. Okay, so this is where you can do a lot of the functionality and keep it in the REPC because it's avoiding really talking about commissions or BAC. So real quickly, this section just makes reference to, okay, what deal are we talking about? You know, what offer reference date, right? And then in section 1.1, it says the following: seller agrees to pay either a dollar amount or a percentage of the purchase price to the buyer's brokerage. See the difference there? We're not crediting the agent or the buyer. We are now going to be paying a certain amount that they owe to their brokerage. That's the difference between sharing the BAC, which is commissions, versus us paying a commitment that the buyers have. And I know that seems like splitting hairs, but this is run by the DRE, and this is an approved way of doing that inside the REPC. Okay. So if you want to do that, if everybody's head's nodding the right direction, that the seller is going to pay some amount on behalf of the buyers in what we would have normally considered BAC, this is actually the correct way to do it if you want to keep it in the REPC. That makes sense?
What did the original addendum say?
Say that again, Don.
What did the original addendum say?
yeah, let me put that back on screen. The original addendum said $4,300 of the buyer's agent commission to be gifted to the buyers toward down payment and or closing costs. So one, they're talking about commissions. Two, this is part of the REPC, has nothing to do with, the REPC has nothing to do with the BAC that's being paid. It should have nothing to do with the BAC that's paid between two brokerages.
So that real estate payment addendum looks like it's only in addition to the MLS co-op. It doesn't look like it can be a negative or a reduction. It's only an addition.
Correct. Correct.
So this wouldn't work for this scenario at all.
Okay, anybody see a way to make this work in Haley's scenario? You should, because you're right, Haley, this is right. So if we offer 2% out BAC, we're still obligated to pay the 2%. But what could we do at that point? We just talked about it. You could use escrow instructions. So if there was 3% offered by way of BAC and we wanted to credit the buyers, we could have this put in place after we have escrow instruction signs saying how much is being paid from the seller's brokerage to the buyer's brokerage is 0. Does that make sense? Now we're not double paying, right? The 3% that was offered by way of BAC is now going to be captured in this addendum as a credit from the seller to the buyer for their obligation towards their buyer's brokerage. Dan, are you tracking that? I know if you get it, anybody can get it.
I'm not.
You're not getting it?
Mm-mm.
Okay, let me take one more. Brandon, go ahead.
Isn't it just easier to do it with the addendum to the buyer broker agreement?
It is. I think that is the easiest way to do it and to be compliant. But I want to just show, Haley, if you and I are doing a deal, right? And let's just say for easiness, we're both brokers as well. You're the broker of company A, I'm the broker of company B. On the MLS, I have advertised that I will pay you 3% if you bring a ready, willing, and an able buyer, right? We're good so far.
Right.
Okay. And then you come back to me and say, hey, Matt, you know what? Actually, it's a family member. I want to credit them, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to show it on taxes or whatever the reason being. I would turn to you and say, Haley, it's great. We have this real estate brokerage payment addendum, which I will be happy to credit what I was going to offer by way of BAC. I will put it in section 1.1 here, and it will go as a credit to your buyers. But in order to do that, because I'm not going to pay twice, I'm going to send you escrow instructions that says the BAC that's offered on the MLS is now going from 3% to 0%, because the 3% is now going to be in this addendum.
So you're doing both. I see.
Yep, that's it.
Yep. Okay.
So either way, I agree with Brandon. I think it's easier to tell them to just update their an addendum to their buyer broker agreement. But if for some reason this is needed, that's a way to do it.
So Matt, where in the rules does it say that no commission can be shared?
Yeah. So let me see if I can quickly find that for you. I have so many windows open, it's not even funny.
I just wonder, about that and what makes the nuance of adjusting the buyer broker agreement not, contradict that.
This is the way for the IRS to track where the money's going so they can see who to tax.
Okay, conspiracy theory. No, you're right. So Haley, I will get you the rule in here, but it's fundamentally in the rule. I couldn't tell you just on the spot. I don't have all of them memorized, but you cannot pay an unlicensed individual a commission. So if it's BAC, that is the buyer's agency commission. If you are giving that, you've crossed a threshold, right?
Okay.
So that's what drives all of this, and it's what the division pays.
I'm just wondering how it's nuanced so that you can adjust the buyer's agent commission agreement, or the buyer broker agreement, and provide them with a credit.
Okay, so let's, for the sake of that question, if you and I were doing a deal, you're the buyer and I'm the seller, can I credit you some money?
Yeah, buyer and seller can.
Right, I'm the seller and you're the buyer. Can I credit you some money? Answer
Yeah.
yes, as long
Yeah.
as it meets underwriter approval, and which, by the way, on that addendum I was showing you, there is some verbiage in there that says it's all conditioned on it meeting underwriter approval. So we have taken fundamentally, let's say the dollar amount's $15,000 that was allocated for BAC. And since there's really kind of three parties here, buyers parties, sellers parties, and us as the brokerage, I have offered out on the MLS, if you bring me a ready, willing, and able buyer, $15,000 of BAC, buyer's agency commission. But if you come to me with a special circumstance, this is the nuance you're talking about. As long as you and I agree that I'm going to take those same $15,000 and I'm going to remove it as BAC to you, and I'm then going to put it as a credit to the buyer on an addendum that the underwriter sees and understands that's where the credit's coming from and essentially sources it. That's the big difference. That's the nuance, because we're no longer sharing commissions. It's me giving a credit to my, me as the seller giving credit to the buyer on the transaction. It's not a commission at that point because the commission was removed. You know, we have that agreement in escrow instructions, and now it's just me giving you a credit for the seller, because from the seller to the buyer, because me as a seller, I now have $15,000. I'm no longer obligated to pay my listing brokerage because of the escrow instruction agreement.
Hey, Matt, can I just ask a clarification question? I missed it in the beginning. Who
Sure.
presented the addendum in the first place, the buyer or the seller?
The buyer did.
The buyer presented the, okay, and they wanted
The buyer's
to
agent sent it over to our agent, who was the listing agent, and then it was reinforced from the loan officer saying, just sign the damn form and don't tell me how to do my job,
Yeah, okay.
which
Got
was
it.
highly entertaining.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay. So
Oh,
yeah,
Matt,
go ahead, Don.
why does the seller even care what the buyer's agent does with his commission?
We don't. As far as like a net to the seller, that's where you're coming from. It doesn't matter. He's going to pay the $15,000 by way of BAC, or he's going to pay it, you know, by way of an addendum. And you're right. We don't care, Don. And that's where we started off with, is the easiest way for all of this, rather than send an addendum to the REPC, is to sign an addendum with your buyer from your buyer's brokerage saying at closing, we will credit you $4,300 at closing, because we're going to get 15K, right? And we can turn around and credit some of that to the buyer. We just can't call it commissions.
So on the settlement statement, can it just show as a credit from the buyer's agent?
If we do it that way, where there is an addendum to their buyer broker agreement, yes, but not, that should not be happening by way of an addendum to the REPC.
Yeah, I agree
So
with
you're-
Don. I don't even know why we would introduce that to
Yeah,
the
so wouldn't
other
it,
agent.
wouldn't it be easier just to adjust their buyer agreement and leave the seller out of it?
Yeah,
Yes, that's the whole proposal. That's what we started off with. I was kind of laughing because this agent sent it over and their loan officer was telling us we didn't know what we were doing. And it's like, well, frankly, you don't know what you're doing. It's very easy. Just don't send us an addendum to the REPC. Just do an addendum to your buyer broker agreement, get it over to title, and they'll show it as a credit from your brokerage to them when they close. That is the easiest and most correct way to do it.
so Matt, what happened? Did he try to send that through his underwriter?
Well, oh my gosh, thank you, Daryl. So loan officers are like a rough parallel. It's kind of like your loan officer is an agent and the underwriter is kind of like the principal broker who actually knows the rules. And the underwriter, you know, would see something like that and be like, hopefully, right, if they know what they're doing, they should be throwing a flag on that.
Yeah.
Right. But the loan officer, just like an agent, quite often is motivated on getting something closed. And so they kind of beat their chest and tell you, just get me the damn form signed. Don't tell me how to do my job. To your question, what happened with it? I sent them a nice video email with what you saw on screen with escrow instructions. And that's the only thing that we should be signing as brokers. And then I walked them through how to put it into an addendum to their buyer broker. We didn't hear anything back, so I'm assuming that that's the route they went.
Cool.
Okay. All right, well, I have this in nice outline format, but I think we covered most of the points I had on this. Oh, and Haley brought up the other one I had as kind of a alternate scenario. So the last thing I wanted to cover is we had talked a couple weeks ago about the closing cost addendum, right? And this is what I got to move this bar.
Hey, Matt, on this same addendum, if you want to run this around the tree a couple of times, you could use this addendum and then just do an escrow instruction signed by both brokers to reduce the BAC, right? And then the money comes from the seller.
Yes, so that was the scenario we were talking about, Daryl, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted to do an alternate route, the hard route,
Yeah, yeah.
you could use the brokerage addendum and then do escrow instructions to offset the amount that the seller is going to pay via the REPC and reduce what's going to be paid by BAC at the same time.
So there is not a form that says buyer's contribution, or excuse me, buyer's agent. No, you can't do that. Never mind.
Yeah, well, and that's another one, right? I love it too. Even internally, just for you guys on the call, if you ever send me, if you're doing it the right way, if you're doing an addendum to your buyer broker, or you're doing an addendum to your ERS, and you're wanting to credit back either party, please don't say we will credit them commissions, right? We will offer them as a company a credit at closing. Just keep it that simple. Company will credit the buyer X $1,000 at closing, right? Because we don't want to have those words in there about commissions because it makes us vulnerable. All right, last thing I wanted to touch on, we'd covered this a couple times ago, or at least touched on it, the closing costs addendum, right? And in here, I highlighted the portions, you know, why this is so important. When somebody writes an addendum that just says seller to contribute $4,000 in concessions or closing costs, quite often what ensues is a little bit of a debate on what can fall under that umbrella. And what's nice about this addendum to the REPC is it actually calls out what are probably pretty well accepted areas to be paid by way of closing costs. And the last section, which is in a little brighter yellow, is the part that I think is so beneficial. Any unused portion of seller's contribution may, at the buyer's option, be used to reduce the purchase price. That is really great language, because if everybody signed off on this, it pretty much says if the seller agreed to pay $5,000, they're paying $5,000, not, oh crap, well, we ran a little short and don't know what to do with it. We're going to try and cram it into this area, and all of a sudden there's a debate and an argument. And I wanted to compare and contrast this with the UtahRealEstate.com's rules and regulations in regards to what are viewed as concessions, right? So if you did not use this addendum, here's what they say. Seller's concessions means and refers to any special financing or sales concession paid from the seller proceeds. So there's the first big qualifier, to or on behalf of the buyer as reflected in the settlement statement. And there's a key, we got to be on the settlement statement. Examples include points paid by the seller on behalf of the buyer, seller paid closing costs, cash or cash allowances not escrowed, down payment assistance, prepaid HOA fees, additions or alterations not considered deferred maintenance, personal property not usual and customary to such transaction, conveyed from the seller to the buyer having agreed upon a monetary value. So when you read this paragraph, it gets, in my opinion, much more ambiguous. And when it's ambiguous or at least not well defined, you open the door for people to argue about what it means. So I am a big fan of making sure you use the closing costs addendum, because it is very well defined. And if it doesn't meet one of the first 4 items, the rest of it can be used to reduce the purchase price. So it's a great catch-all language, and you don't get in the game of debating with the other side what is and what isn't closing costs. Make sense? Okay. I'll take your silence as acquiescence that it's good. All right, guys. What are some of the things you're seeing now in the shifted market that is causing you consternation or grief or questions? Are you running up against anything that's problematic for you? Nothing? You got to be kidding me.
Snow.
Well, yeah, it's funny that you say that, because what happens when, I mean, we're coming up on this, right? I took my wife, we live down in south end of Utah County. We went out to the south end of Utah Lake, and I was just trying to do a heat check to see where the lake is. And it's about 1.5 feet from where it normally is, but all of the surrounding farmland is already under like 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water. Right? And that's before the melting has even started. So the reason I bring that up is, what happens if we're under contract and we get a quick runoff and some water comes in the basement? We all know how damaging that can be. What's the obligation for a seller? What's your repercussion for a buyer? Say that again, Brandon.
They got to fix it.
Do they?
Full disclosure.
I'm hearing all the good things. So 1, we probably should be updating our seller's disclosures. And then Brandon, is it absolutely required that they fix it?
It's got to be presented. It's got to be sold in the same way we saw it the first time.
Unless
No, it doesn't need to be fixed, but it needs to be disclosed. And that way the potential buyer can make the decision whether they want it fixed through due diligence or before closing.
So you're both right. Brandon hit on a key point. You have to deliver it in essentially the same condition as when they made the offer.
And you have to maintain insurance.
And you have to maintain insurance. And if you do have that and you actually repair it, that's where you still need to update your seller's disclosures. Hey, we had a flood come in the basement window on the northeast side. It took out the carpeting. We had sheetrock cut up, 2 feet up. We replaced it, retextured it, recarpeted. Even though it's repaired, you still got to disclose it. Now, the point I wanted to make is, if the property gets damaged through quote unquote an act of God, which flooding falls
more than 10%.
That's right. Say it again, Randy.
More than 10% of the value of the home.
What happens if the damages are more than 10%? Anyone?
It's subject to
Either party
falling out
can
of
cancel.
contract. Yeah, either party can cancel. So
There you go. There you go. So if the seller's like, yeah, you know what? I don't have $40,000 to fix the basement and I really don't need to move, they can cancel. Are they in default?
That was my next question.
I have some heads shaking no. Anybody want to counter that? I'm going to pull this up real quickly. Give me 2 seconds here, guys. Okay, open this up. All right. I guess I need to share my screen again, right? Let's see. Share. Move you guys out of the way. There we go. All right. So section 20, right? This is what we're talking about. Risk of loss. If prior to closing, any part of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire, vandalism, flood, earthquake, or act of God, the risk of such loss or damage shall be borne by the seller. Provided, however, so there is a condition, a qualifier, that if the cost of repairing such loss or damage would exceed 10% of the purchase price in section 2, either party may elect to cancel the property by providing written notice to the other party, in which instance earnest money deposit or deposits shall be returned to the buyer. So it doesn't directly state it, but if you look at section 16, if it instructs the earnest money to be returned, it certainly wipes out one of the options in section 16, and is certainly implied that this was already pre-agreed upon, that this would be the remedy. So there you go. You're all prepared for the flood season. You now can talk your people through. And how would we establish the 10%? I mean, that's an interesting question, right? How would you determine the 10%? Because I guarantee you, if you're on the other side, if I'm the seller and Brandon, you're the buyer or the buyer's agent, and I say, yeah, you know what, we got flooding in the basement, and per section 20
estimates.
That's right. Paper trail.
Isn't it at the buyer's discretion to get the estimates, because the seller may have motive to
Randy, you've been in the business too long. You are jaded. No, you're right. On the one hand, the buyer, I would assume, would at least maybe already have, or shortly thereafter have, an appraisal. So you can establish what the quote unquote value is of the home. It's pretty easy to do a 10% calculation. All that's missing at that point is documentation from some licensed contractors to say this is what it is going to cost to repair. So,
and unfortunately, the buyer does lose their cost of appraisal, cost of inspections, et cetera.
Yep. So this isn't a theoretical. I had a few years ago an agent who the clients had removed the window wells, and this is the genius sometimes of homeowners. They had removed the window wells, and they had these big sloping things towards the basement windows. Well, lo and behold, we got one of those nice summer storms where it dumped, an inch and a half of rain in, a couple of hours, and all that water went right down the slopes to the windows and flooded out the basement. And it did exceed the 10%, and the deal was on. So, all right, guys. Well, that's what I had for you this week. I hope it's helpful. Just remember the takeaways. Don't use escrow instructions unless it's going to be in conjunction with the brokerage cost addendum. The best way is to instruct the other side to do an addendum to their buyer broker agreement that should be accepted by any underwriter at any lender. And then also just be aware of how powerful the closing cost addendum is. Don't forget it, right? We get in the heat of the moment, we write a contract. It's like, oh yeah, closing cost to be $4,000. Take the extra time, do right by your client, and use the addendum that gives them very powerful language. Okay. All right, guys, have a great Monday, and we will talk.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, see y'all.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thanks, and I was looking for a full moon on the emojis, and I found one. So there you go.
That's okay. Brandon was giving me a hard time about not having an iPhone, and I gave him a sheep emoji. All right, see you guys.
Thanks, guys.